This isn't a story about getting lost. It's a story about being watched for years by someone who believed human suffering was an experiment and chose his victims from a quiet forest where no one would hear them scream. Before we continue, please take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You're part of this community. We'd love to hear from you. And remember to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. No one was supposed to notice it. At 2:17 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday in April 2012, a single blip appeared on a monitoring screen inside a regional telecom center in British Columbia, Canada. It lasted less than 8 seconds, weak, fragmented, almost invisible. But it shouldn't have existed at all. The phone number tied to that signal had been inactive for 6 years. The account had been closed, the SIM card declared dead, the owner presumed lost forever. Yet there it was, briefly alive, pinging a tower from deep, inside a stretch of wilderness where no cell coverage officially reached. The technician on duty, Aaron Feldman, frowned at his screen. He'd worked network diagnostics for over a decade. Ghost signals happened, but not like this. Not from numbers long removed from the system. He pulled up the archived account. Daniel Reeves, age at disappearance, 34. Status, missing since September 2006. Last known location, Black Pine Provincial Forest. Aaron leaned closer to the monitor. The coordinates didn't match any road, didn't match any trail, didn't match any registered infrastructure. The signal came from beneath a mountain ridge, and then it vanished. Daniel Reeves didn't talk much about his personal life. At North Core Analytics, where he worked as a systems architect, most people knew him only as the quiet guy who stayed late, drank bad coffee, and never joined office lunches. He was recently divorced, no kids, no close friends in the city. What he did talk about occasionally was hiking. Out there, he once told a coworker, everything makes sense. No noise, no people pretending. Every few months, Daniel would disappear for a long weekend into the mountains of British Columbia. Alone, always alone. He knew the forests well. He'd grown up in the province, camping with his father before cancer took him when Daniel was 19. Those trips were the last memories he still trusted. On Friday, September 8, 2006, Daniel requested 4 days off. I'll be back Wednesday, he told his manager. No signal. If anything breaks, you're on your own. He packed carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, canned food, water purifier, first aid kit, map, compass, knife, flashlight, and his phone, a battered Sony Ericsson, fully charged, even though he knew it would be useless out there. By noon, he was driving north toward Black Pine Provincial Forest, a vast, rugged region of steep slopes, dense pine growth, and forgotten logging paths from the 1960s. At the ranger station, Daniel signed the logbook. Name, Daniel Reeves. Vehicle, blue Subaru Outback. Route, East Ridge Loop. Return, September 12th. The ranger on duty, Mark Ellison, glanced at the entry. Solo? He asked. Daniel nodded. Ellison hesitated. Weather can turn fast up there. Fog rolls in thick. I'll manage, Daniel replied calmly. Done this trail before. Ellison stamped the page. Check in when you're back. Daniel shouldered his pack and stepped onto the trail. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Monday passed. Then Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Daniel hadn't shown up for work. His manager tried calling, straight to voicemail. At first, no one panicked. Daniel was independent. Maybe he stayed an extra day. Maybe weather delayed him. By Thursday, concern crept in. The building superintendent checked Daniel's apartment. Everything was untouched. No packed bags, no signs of a rushed departure. His car wasn't in the parking garage. By Friday afternoon, the police were notified when rangers found Daniel's Subaru exactly where he'd left it. Locked, undamaged, gathering pine needles. The situation shifted from concern to dread. Search teams moved fast. They followed his planned route, checked campsites, scanned ravines, sent dogs along the trail. The scent vanished near a rocky stream crossing, clean, sudden, unnatural. No tent, no backpack, no footprints leading away. It was as if Daniel had simply ceased to exist. The search lasted 3 weeks. Helicopters? Thermal imaging? Volunteers? Drones, new at the time, limited, unreliable. Nothing. No remains, no clothing, no evidence of an accident or animal attack. Eventually, the search was suspended. Daniel's mother flew in from Alberta and stood beside the empty trailhead for hours, staring at the trees as if they might speak. The case was marked unsolved. Over time, Daniel Reeves became another name in a filing cabinet, another story hikers whispered about around campfires. Another disappearance the forest swallowed whole. Now, 6 years later, Aaron Feldman stared at the screen in disbelief. The coordinates were precise, the timestamp undeniable. A dead phone had spoken. He forwarded the anomaly to his supervisor, who forwarded it again, until it landed on the desk of Detective Laura Hensley, newly assigned to cold cases. She pulled Daniel Reeves' file, and as she read, one detail made her pause. 3 other disappearances, different years. Same forest, same pattern. Solo hikers, cars left behind, no remains, all unsolved. Hensley closed the file slowly. Whatever had sent that signal wasn't an accident, and whatever waited out there had been waiting a very long time. Detective Laura Hensley stood over the map table long after everyone else had left the briefing room. Pinned to the board were satellite images of Black Pine Provincial Forest, layer after layer of green, broken only by thin gray lines marking approved hiking trails and old service roads. And then there was the red dot. The coordinates pulled from the telecom anomaly sat in a place that made no sense. No trail, no road, no structures, no reason for any signal, weak or otherwise, to originate there. It was as if the phone had awakened underground. By protocol, cold cases stayed cold unless new evidence surfaced. This was evidence. Within 48 hours, Hensley secured approval for a limited reconnaissance operation. No press, no announcements, just enough manpower to confirm whether the coordinates meant anything at all. The team was small. 2 provincial rangers, experienced in off-trail navigation, 1 search and rescue specialist, a forensic field technician, a signal analyst from the telecom company, and Hensley herself. They moved in late April, when the snow line had receded but the forest was still quiet, before peak hiking season erased footprints and clues. The helicopters could only get them part way. The rest they would have to walk. By midday, the team left the last recognized trail behind. The forest changed almost immediately. Trees grew closer together. Underbrush thickened. The ground sloped unevenly, broken by rock shelves and old erosion scars. No footprints. No signs of recent human activity. This area's been untouched for decades, Ranger Tom Calder muttered. Even poachers don't come out here. The signal analyst checked his handheld receiver periodically. Nothing. If the phone transmitted again, it wouldn't last long. They hiked for hours, navigating purely by GPS and compass. As dusk approached, fatigue set in, and with it, doubt. Then Calder stopped. Hold up. He crouched near a rise in the ground. At first glance, it looked like a natural mound, covered in moss, pine needles, and tangled roots. But the shape was wrong. Too symmetrical. Too deliberate. This isn't erosion, Calder said quietly. They cleared away loose debris with gloved hands. Concrete emerged beneath the soil. Old, weathered, but unmistakably man-made. No one spoke. It took nearly an hour to expose the full outline. A steel hatch, circular, partially concealed beneath a false rock facade that had collapsed inward over time. There were no markings, no warnings, no indication of ownership, just rust, dirt, and silence. Cold War era, the older ranger said after inspecting the hinges. We had dozens of these built across the province. Most were sealed, some forgotten. Hensley swallowed. If this thing's been here since the 60s, she said, someone's been maintaining it. They tried the handle. It didn't move. Locked. From the inside or the outside, it was impossible to tell. Backup was called in. Generators, cutting tools, lighting rigs. When the lock finally gave way with a screech of tearing metal, no one rushed forward. The smell came first. Stale. Rotten. Air that hadn't been disturbed in years. Hensley lifted her flashlight and stepped inside. A narrow concrete corridor sloped downward, swallowing the beam of light after only a few meters. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The walls were slick with moisture and mold. Old wiring hung loose, like veins torn from a body. Every footstep echoed. The passage opened into a larger chamber, then another, and then someone screamed. 4 figures sat slumped against the far wall. At first, the mind tried to rationalize it. Mannequins, training dummies, anything but what they really were. But the chains told the truth. Rusty iron links bound skeletal, legs to a thick metal pipe embedded deep into the concrete wall. 4 skeletons, seated, facing the room. Clothes hung in tatters from brittle frames, shoes still on their feet, plastic bottles and crushed food tins scattered nearby. In the corner, a bucket, used, abandoned. The beam of a flashlight drifted upward. Scratches covered the wall above the bodies. Hundreds of them, grouped in 5s. Counting? Someone had been counting days. The forensic technician began tallying the marks, silently at first. He stopped. started over, counted again. 1,300, he said hoarsely. Roughly. Hensley closed her eyes. 1,300 days. Over 3.5 years. Someone had lived and died down here. The youngest skeleton sat farthest to the right. Near its hand lay an old mobile phone. Cracked casing, dead screen, a familiar early 2000s model. The signal analyst crouched beside it. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the phone." Daniel Reeves's phone. Nearby, a broken electrical wire dangled from the ceiling, its copper core exposed. The analyst followed the line with his eyes. "If that wire touched the charging contacts," he said slowly, "it could have powered the phone for a moment, just enough to ping the network. An accident, a coincidence, or the last whisper of a man who had waited years to be found." They pulled back from the bunker and sealed the site within the hour. By nightfall, floodlights illuminated the forest clearing. Forensic teams moved in. Photographers documented every angle. Evidence was catalogued with clinical precision. But one truth became undeniable almost immediately. Daniel Reeves hadn't been alone. DNA analysis would later confirm it. The 4 skeletons belonged to people who vanished over a span of nearly 20 years. Different ages, different lives, same forest, same fate. Someone had been using the wilderness as a hunting ground, and the bunker as a cage. As Hensley watched the bodies being removed, one thought clawed at her mind. This place had been hidden for decades. Supplies had been brought in, locks maintained, victims monitored. Whoever did this hadn't just killed, they had watched, and somewhere, whether alive or dead, they had left behind the reason. The bunker didn't sleep. Even after the bodies were removed and the entrance sealed, the air inside felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Detective Laura Hensley stood alone in the main chamber while the forensic teams worked deeper inside. The scratch marks on the wall drew her back again and again. 5 lines, a pause, 5 more. Someone had counted every sunrise they never saw. She raised her flashlight higher, and that's when she noticed the letters. Not scratches, words. Carved unevenly into the concrete wall were 4 names. They were faint, etched with shaking hands, but legible. Ethan Brooks, Maya Lennox, Colin Ward, Daniel Reeves. Each name had a date beside it. Different years, different handwriting styles, different depths in the concrete, but the same finality. Hensley felt her throat tighten. These weren't anonymous prisoners, she murmured. They wanted to be remembered. The remains were transported to the Provincial Forensic Center overnight. Anthropologists reconstructed height, age, and sex from the bones. Dental records were cross-referenced. DNA samples were compared against national missing persons databases. The matches came back within days. Ethan Brooks, 51, disappeared in 1991. High school geography teacher, last seen hiking alone in Black Pine Forest. Maya Lennox, 29, disappeared in 1998. Registered nurse, went missing after a solo weekend trek. Colin Ward, 44, disappeared in 2004. Software consultant, divorced, no children. Daniel Reeves, 34, disappeared in 2006. 4 people, taken years apart, all alone, all following legal logged routes. All ended up chained in the same room, in the room beyond. While identification continued, another discovery was made. At the far end of the bunker, past the chamber of bodies, was a smaller room. Inside it stood a metal table. On the table, a notebook, an ordinary school notebook, squared paper, half filled. The cover was stained and warped from moisture, but the writing inside was crisp. Too neat, too controlled. The first entry was dated October 12, 1991. Subject 1 delivered successfully, male, approximately 50 years old. Isolated, no immediate resistance once consciousness returned. Reaction, confusion, fear, denial. Hypothesis, prolonged isolation will result in compliance. Hensley felt her stomach turn. The entries continued, dry, clinical, devoid of empathy. Day 30, subject 1 has ceased verbal resistance, appetite reduced, water consumption increased, emotional volatility decreasing. This wasn't a confession, it was documentation. A new entry appeared 7 years later. June 1998, subject 2 introduced, female, younger, placed adjacent to subject 1. Interaction between subjects observed. The author wrote about conversations overheard, shared memories, attempts to keep each other sane. Hope appears contagious at first. Expect collapse once reinforcement ceases. Hensley had to stop reading twice just to breathe. The pattern repeated. A man in 2004, Daniel in 2006. Each delivery described with chilling precision. Subject 4 exhibits intellectual curiosity. attempts rational discourse. Will be interesting to observe degradation over time. The captor never used names, only numbers. According to the journal, the captor visited once every 6 to 10 days. He brought water, canned food, dry rations, enough to keep them alive, never enough to keep them strong. He never spoke, never answered questions, never acknowledged screams. Interaction minimized to avoid contamination of results. The experiment ran for years, and then people started dying. Day 1030, subject 1 expired. Cause, physical deterioration. Body removed on next visit to prevent psychological interference. The second death followed months later, then another. The remaining 2, Colin and Daniel, survived longer. They were younger, healthier, but even they began to weaken. The handwriting changed near the end. Less precise, more erratic. Day 120. My health is declining. Diagnosis confirmed. Time limited. The last page was dated August 2009. Ending observation phase. No further supplies will be delivered. Outcome will conclude naturally. No signature, no remorse, just an ending. The scratch marks on the wall told the rest of the story. Counting continued long after the journal ended, until it stopped. The final tally matched the last mark, 142 days. Daniel Reeves had been the last to die, and just before he did, his phone had waited. Hensley closed the notebook slowly. 4 victims, 1 location, decades of preparation. The journal documented the how, but not the who. Who had the knowledge, the access, the discipline to carry this out for nearly 20 years? And why had no one noticed him? The answer, it turned out, was waiting somewhere above ground, hidden in plain sight. The journal didn't name its author, but it didn't need to. Every sentence revealed the same thing. Discipline, patience, routine. Someone trained to observe without emotion. Someone who believed control was more important than morality. Detective Laura Hensley had seen this mindset before. Not in criminals, in soldiers. The notebook was processed overnight. 1 clear fingerprint surfaced on the lower corner of the last page, pressed hard, as if the writer's hand had trembled while closing the book. The print was uploaded to the national database. The result came back in under an hour. Name, Arthur Keene. Age at death, 67. Former occupation, military intelligence officer. Status, deceased, February 2010. Cause of death, liver failure. Hensley stared at the screen. He died, she said quietly, before they were ever found. Arthur Keene had retired from the armed forces in the late 1980s. No spouse, no children, no close relatives. After retirement, he purchased a small, isolated property 9 miles from Black Pine Forest, a weather-beaten cabin surrounded by trees, accessible only by a dirt access road. Utilities were minimal, no internet, no close neighbors. He lived quietly, paid taxes on time, visited the same grocery store once a week. No criminal record, no complaints. No reason for anyone to look twice. The perfect man to disappear into routine. The cabin had been sealed since Keene's death. When investigators arrived, the locks were still intact. Inside, the air smelled stale, like paper and dust. Every surface was covered in notebooks, shelves, boxes, drawers, hundreds of pages of writing, years of thoughts. The early journals were almost mundane. Keene wrote about missing the structure of military life, about civilians being undisciplined, about the decay of order in modern society. Then the tone shifted. In a notebook dated 1993, Keene wrote, "True behavior only emerges when comfort is removed. Isolation reveals the core. I saw it during service. I want to see it again, without interference." He referenced studies, military interrogation manuals, psychological breakdown timelines. He wasn't improvising. He was continuing a project. A later entry explained how it began. While hunting deer in the late 1990s, Keene discovered the bunker, an abandoned Cold War shelter. Camouflaged? Forgotten? Unlisted on modern maps. He wrote about cleaning the entrance, testing the ventilation, checking water lines. Structure remains viable, suitable for long-term containment. He didn't call it a prison. He called it a facility. Maps recovered from the cabin showed hiking trails marked in pencil, certain points circled, observation locations. Subjects must be alone. Minimal social footprint. Delayed response ensures extended observation. He followed hikers for hours, sometimes days, learning routines, waiting for the moment no one would notice. The attacks were simple. A cloth, a chemical, silence. By the time his victims woke up, the experiment had already begun. Keene believed he wasn't cruel. He never beat them, never spoke harshly, never raised his voice. He believed deprivation was cleaner. Pain distorts results. Absence clarifies. He provided just enough food to delay death, just enough water to prolong hope. Then he watched it drain away. In late 2009, Keane was diagnosed with advanced liver disease. Doctors gave him months. His journal entries grew shaky. Time limited, data sufficient, outcome predictable. He stopped visiting the bunker, stopped delivering supplies, and waited to die. Arthur Keane passed away alone in his cabin in February 2010. No one attended his funeral. No one searched his house. No one knew what he'd left behind in the forest. By the time the truth emerged, justice was impossible. The man responsible was ashes. The victims had already waited years for rescue that never came. Families were notified one by one. Some cried, some screamed, some sat in silence, finally understanding why hope had always felt unfinished. For Detective Hensley, the case was solved, but not closed, because one question still refused to go away. How many others had passed through that forest and never made it into the bunker? In Keane's basement, investigators found backpacks, sleeping bags, clothes, some with name tags, some without. 7 hiking locations were marked on his maps. Only 4 bodies had been found, which meant at least 3 people were still missing, somewhere in the forest or somewhere else entirely. The case of Black Pine Forest was officially marked resolved 6 months later. On paper, in reality, it would never be finished. Search teams returned to the woods throughout the summer. They followed Arthur Keane's hand-drawn maps, checked every circled location, excavated shallow graves where the ground looked disturbed. They found fragments, a rusted belt buckle, a cracked pair of glasses, a torn backpack strap, but no bodies. If Keane had killed others before perfecting the bunker or disposed of them elsewhere, the forest had erased the evidence long ago. The wilderness had done what it always did. It kept its secrets. Provincial authorities made a quiet decision. The bunker was too dangerous to leave standing, too tempting, too disturbing. In early spring, demolition crews arrived under armed supervision. Explosives shattered the concrete. The steel door was crushed and buried. Earth was poured over the site until nothing remained but an unremarkable rise in the forest floor. No marker, no plaque, no acknowledgement. Officially, the structure no longer existed. Unofficially, rangers avoided the area. The remains were released one by one. Ethan Brooks was buried in Alberta beside his parents. His daughter, now grown, attended the funeral alone. She said she'd spent 20 years believing her father had simply walked away. Maya Lennox was laid to rest in a small town near Vancouver. Her mother placed a hiking compass in the coffin, something Maya never went into the woods without. Colin Ward's brother flew in from California and stayed for days, asking the same question over and over. Why him? No one had an answer. Daniel Reeves was buried last. His mother stood by the grave long after everyone else left. 4 years of waiting, 6 years of silence, one brief phone signal that changed everything. Daniel's phone was returned to the family after the investigation closed. It still wouldn't turn on, but his mother kept it anyway. She said it didn't feel dead. Detective Laura Hensley transferred out of major crimes the following year. Before she left, she visited Black Pine Forest one last time. She walked the main trail, passed the ranger station, watched hikers sign the logbook. Families, couples, solo travelers, all of them unaware. The forest looked peaceful. It always had. Psychologists later studied Arthur Keane's writings. They concluded he wasn't insane. He didn't believe he was chosen. He wasn't driven by rage or revenge. He was driven by curiosity, a man who believed people were variables, that suffering was data, that morality interfered with results. The most dangerous kind of person, they wrote, is one who thinks he's right. New measures were introduced after the case. Mandatory route check-ins, expanded trail cameras, random ranger patrols. But forests are vast, and rules don't reach every corner. People still hike alone. They still trust the quiet. When the bunker was demolished, one ranger noticed something just before the final charge was set. On a broken fragment of wall, half buried in dirt, were faint scratches. 5 lines, then 5 more. The concrete was removed before anyone could count them. No one wanted to know the number. In telecom records, the anomaly remains archived. A phone that should have been silent. A signal that lasted seconds. A final coincidence that exposed years of hidden horror. Investigators later said it wasn't coincidence at all. It was timing. If that wire had fallen months earlier, or months later, no one would have ever known. The forest would have kept everything. And somewhere deep beneath the trees, 4 people would still be missing.